To remove and install the front drive shaft on your Polaris XPEDITION XP or ADV, follow these steps.
Park the vehicle on a flat level surface. Ensure it is in park and remove the key. Next, remove the center cap from the wheel. Then, remove and discard the cotter pin on the axle shaft. Continue by loosening the axle nut. Next, loosen the lug nuts while the vehicle is on the ground, but do not remove at this time. Then, safely elevate the vehicle. Reference your owner's manual for proper lifting techniques. Once safely elevated, remove the lug nuts and set aside. Then, remove the wheel and set aside. Next, loosen the brake pad adjuster screw on the brake caliper. Then, remove and discard the upper and lower caliper mounting fasteners. Continue by removing the caliper from the front hub. And support it with a wire hanger, rope, or retention strap to avoid damaging the brake line. Then, remove the castle nut, cone washer, and the brake disc. Also, remove the wheel hub and set aside. Next, remove the lower shock mount fastener, nut, and washer. Discard the nut. Then, remove the upper ball joint pinch fastener and discard the nut. Continue by removing and discarding the lower ball joint nut. Then, lightly tap on the bearing carrier while lifting up on the upper control arm to separate the upper ball joint from the carrier. Before continuing, support the bearing carrier with a wire hanger, rope, or retention strap to avoid damaging the steering rod. Also, support the upper control arm with a wire hanger, rope, or retention strap to create more room for removal of the axle. Then, remove the lower ball joint end from the bearing carrier. If the ball joint doesn't move, tap the carrier with a soft face hammer to free the ball joint end. Next, remove the drive shaft from the bearing carrier. If necessary, reposition the bearing carrier to create more space for removal of the drive shaft. Then, with a short, sharp jerk, remove the drive shaft from the front gear case. Next, clean the anti-seize off the drive shaft splines using a clean, dry cloth. Then, inspect the threads and splines on the drive shaft for nicks or burrs and replace if needed. Continue by inspecting the CV boots to ensure there are no cuts, wear, or damage, and replace if needed. Next, remove and discard the compression ring on the drive shaft. Then, install a new compression ring into the groove on the end of the drive shaft and ensure it is fully seated. Continue by applying new anti-seize to the inboard splines on the drive shaft. Next, align the splines on the drive shaft with the gear case and push in firmly on the shaft until the compression ring is fully engaged in the gear case. Then, lightly pull on the shaft to ensure the compression ring is fully engaged. Next, insert the shaft into the bearing carrier and push the carrier in to seat the shaft. Continue by installing a new nut on the lower ball joint end. Counter-hold the ball joint end to tighten the nut. Then, insert the upper ball joint end into the bearing carrier and secure with the new nut. Continue by reinstalling the upper ball joint pinch fastener from the front of the vehicle and secure with a new nut. Before continuing, ensure any items used to secure the upper control arm and wheel carrier are removed from the wheel well. Continue by aligning the shock with the lower mount and secure with the retained washer and a new fastener. Next, torque the upper ball joint pinch fastener to specification. Then, torque the lower ball joint nut to specification. Continue by torquing the lower shock mount fastener to specification. Next, install the wheel hub onto the drive shaft and push in until fully seated. Then, reinstall the washer with the domed side out and secure with the retained castle nut. Continue by reinstalling the brake disc on the wheel studs. Next, carefully slide the caliper assembly onto the brake disc, ensuring the brake rotor is between the two pads. Before continuing, ensure any items used to secure the brake caliper are removed from the wheel well. Then, align the caliper with the mounting holes on the hub and install 2 new caliper fasteners. Continue by torquing the fasteners to specification. Next, tighten the set screw on the back of the caliper until the pads touch the brake disc. Then, loosen the set screw a half turn to allow the brake disc to move. Next, reinstall the wheel on the vehicle and tighten the lug nuts until fully seated. Then, safely lower the vehicle until the tires begin to touch the ground. This will help keep the wheel in place when torquing. Once lowered, torque the lug nuts to specification in a crisscross pattern. Then, torque the castle nut to specification. Continue by inserting a new cotter pin and bend around the castle nut to secure. If necessary, tighten the castle nut to align the cotter pin holes. Then, push the dust cap onto the wheel and ensure it is fully seated. Finally, lower the vehicle completely. For more information, see your authorized Polaris dealer or visit Polaris.com.